I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. President Trump says he congratulated Russian President Vladimir Putin today on his re-election. Mr. Trump also said he's making provisions to ensure the U.S. remains the world's preeminent military power.
We had a very good call, and I suspect that we'll probably be meeting in the not-too-distant future to discuss the arms race, which is getting out of control. But we will never allow anybody to have anything even close to what we have.
For the fifth time this month, a package bomb has exploded in Texas. It happened this time at a FedEx facility near San Antonio. One person suffered minor injuries. Meantime, the FBI denied earlier reports that a second bomb had been discovered. 2 people were killed in the 4 prior bombings in Austin. A school shooting in southern Maryland ended today with a gunman getting killed. That's according to a local sheriff who says the suspect was killed by a school resource officer. 2 students were wounded. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos today defended communities' rights to decide whether to arm teachers. DeVos also says a federal commission on school safety is being created. It will consist of her and 3 other cabinet secretaries. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts around the world. I'm Mark Crumpton.
I'm Caroline Hyde in London. Emily Chang is off today. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the fallout spreads over the revelation that data firm Cambridge Analytica got access into info of millions of Facebook users. Cambridge Analytica is now suspending CEO Alexander Nix. We're covering all the angles of this story throughout the hour. And the crisis has gone global. Government officials in the US, the UK and Europe focusing in on the company and moving to take action. Meanwhile, the criticism is only growing over Facebook's response. Why haven't we heard from CEO Mark Zuckerberg and COO Sheryl Sandberg? Now, the market continues to struggle amid the Facebook turmoil and larger tech sell-off. Facebook has now wiped out its gains for the entire 2018, plunging as much as 13% in the past 2 days, putting the stock below key support levels. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg News stocks reporter Abigail Doolittle. So, wow, there goes $45 billion in market cap.
It's pretty extraordinary, this story, and it's evolving. We're still in the early innings here, for sure, Caroline. And if we take a look at the heart of the matter, Cambridge Analytica, they accessed and retained data on Facebook users, 50 million Facebook users, without their permission. Facebook is said to have learned of this back in 2015, and they did not do anything to tell those users or to secure the data. Now, Facebook is saying that this does not constitute a hack or a breach, but they don't allow that kind of data to be sold to this type of a firm. So it's a bit of a gray area. So gray, in fact, as we know, the FTC is launching a probe to see whether or not this is a violation of the 2011 Consent Agreement Act. If there is found to be some sort of violation, it could equal a massive fine, Caroline. It could be really a stunningly large fine. So a worst case scenario on the part of Facebook could be a big fine. Plus, that's bringing the government into the picture. The U.S. government up until now has really regulated U.S. technology very little, less so than European governments. So that could be a double whammy. And if we hop into the Bloomberg to take a look at a monthly chart here of Facebook, a very simple chart, but what we're looking at here in #BTV 3786 is a monthly outside candle. And we see this here circled in yellow. It basically has a higher high and a lower low than the last month. Typically, this speaks to wild uncertainty and volatility on the part of both the buyers and the sellers. It should suggest we could see more of the same ahead. And truly, Caroline, it could also suggest we could see an equal and opposite reaction down of that candle, down towards somewhere between 130 and 140, Caroline. So pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. Amazing stuff, and you're bringing up some of the technical indicators there. Let's have a hop into the Bloomberg and look at the relative strength indicator, because we're now trading below, on Facebook stock, below the 50-day moving average. I'm looking at my screen and you're trading below the 100-day moving average and indeed the 20-day moving average. So here's your relative strength index. If you look at the lower half of your screen as well, this shows where we start to get close to the oversold indicator for the RSI on Facebook. We're at 35. Remember, 30 is when we've hit the oversold mark. Abigail, I know you've got plenty of other rather doomsday technical indicators your way as well.
Yeah, well, Caroline, we were just looking at that monthly chart, and it does suggest that support here is unlikely to hold and that the selling pressure could continue on. Because at the end of the day, investors hate this kind of an overhang and uncertainty. Many analysts out there are saying that this stock was overbought, so many investors in it. So perhaps a cooling off period as we do have this overhang. But very interestingly, Caroline, if we take a look at tech overall on the day, the NASDAQ 100 whipsawed on the day but finished higher. Lots of the other names higher, such as Amazon, Netflix, Alphabet finishing down slightly. So the contagion contained at least today, but Twitter lower on the day in a big way. And this as the social media, in general under fire for data use and privacy. Plus Israel's justice minister saying that the company has ignored requests for legal action to remove online content that was inciting or supportive of terrorism. So that could be an ongoing story. But I would like to highlight a chart here. This is a bullish chart, Caroline. It's G#BTV7472. And this is a longer term chart of Twitter. And now that Twitter is back above its IPO price and really back above this level of resistance marked in blue, it is right now in what is called a confirmed island reversal, which suggests the stock could climb back up toward 50, if not higher. So who knows? Maybe this contagion is not going to continue to affect Twitter. And we always are, or frequently, I should say, are hearing sources saying that this could be a potential buyout candidate. Of course, Caroline, Bloomberg LP does have a breaking news network on Twitter, TikTok.
Fascinating stuff. We love a technical indicator. Abigail Doolittle, great as always to have you on. Thank you. Now, the impact grows for those involved in the Facebook data controversy we were just discussing. Cambridge Analytica's board announced it's suspending CEO Alexander Nix, effective immediately, while also launching an independent investigation into the company's actions. Now, Nix was caught on tape talking about his dealing with the Trump campaign in a Channel 4 investigation. In this clip, Nix is discussing the use of a self-destructing email server to communicate with clients in order to eliminate evidence of their contact.
You send them, and after they've been read, 2 hours later,
they're disappearing. Okay.
And you can do the same.
Yes,
so
we can do that, yeah.
There's no paper trail, there's nothing.
Now, in a statement, the company said, in the view of the board, Mr. Nix's recent comments secretly recorded by Channel 4 and other allegations do not represent the values or operations of the firm, and his suspension reflects the seriousness with which we view this violation. We've asked Dr. Alexander Taylor to serve as acting CEO while an independent investigation is launched to review those comments and allegations. Now, for more on all of this, let's get to Bloomberg Technology's Sarah Fry in San Francisco. You've really been all across this fallout. And Sarah, it's fascinating that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, Nix, now suspended, had really been bragging about the power with Cambridge Analytica had, particularly in the 2016 presidential campaign, saying actually that they did all the research, they had all the data, all the analytics, all the targeting. Does this mean that perhaps they didn't use Facebook's own data as much as we suspected? How do you read it?
Well, I think that there are a lot of questions here about what Cambridge Analytica actually did with the data it got from the researcher in question. It could have been used to build their model. They could have trashed it. It could have been useless. I mean, we don't know to what extent it was actually put into the sort of psychographic targeting that they talk about. And furthermore, we don't know how much of what we've heard about Cambridge Analytica's marketing tactics is simply the firm marketing itself, trying to look very attractive to clients, because this is what a lot of advertising entities do with Facebook data. They try to reach people based on their own demographics and likes. That's what Facebook is for. The issue here is whether they did delete the data when they said they did. And Facebook has said that it has been lied to, that Cambridge Analytica certified in 2015 that they had.
I mean, we're just getting some breaking news that, in fact, Facebook is being sued by investors over voter profile harvesting. This is just crossing the Bloomberg. Investors claim that Facebook failed to disclose the vulnerability and that pro-Trump research firm gathered data without permission. Sarah, all of this is coming out, and meanwhile, we're getting a reaction from the investor base. We don't seem to be getting much reaction from Facebook itself. We're yet to hear from the CEO Zuckerberg, COO Sandberg. What do you think is being said internally at Facebook, because they have had a town hall?
Yeah, so I reported earlier today that the company had a town hall with Paul Grewal, the VP of the legal counsel that has been handling the situation, and wrote on Friday about Facebook's plans to suspend Cambridge Analytica. They're answering questions from employees. The reason we haven't seen Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg out there responding to concerns is because Facebook doesn't actually know on its own. They haven't confirmed for themselves what happened here, according to my sources. They were writing their Friday posts based on the Saturday posts that were going to come out from news organizations. So they have not actually independently verified what Cambridge Analytica actually did here, and they're trying to do an audit to try to look into their servers. Cambridge Analytica has agreed to this audit, but before the company knows for sure either way, they don't want to overreact. So they're kind of backwalking from what they said on Friday about how strongly they were going to take this, and now they're saying that they need to have more information.
Sarah, I mean, you cover this company in terms of the financials. Do you think this is going to start to hit growth? We hear that this is going to have reputational damage and a catastrophe, some lawyers are calling it. What do you call it?
Well, that is a big question, because remember, when Facebook talked about its latest earnings report, it said that time spent on the social network had declined for the first time ever. But they tried to explain that that was by their own design, that they actually wanted people to view less content that was of low quality. Wonder if they'll be able to actually keep up that statement in their next earnings report, or if investors are going to start looking at it and saying, okay, are people not spending as much time on Facebook because they are getting less fake viral content, or are they not spending as much time on Facebook because they actually don't want to be there? So they have to navigate this conversation in a very careful manner and try to figure out how much of this is of their own design, this whole initiative towards time well spent on the platform that Zuckerberg announced in January, and how much of it is actual concern about whether Facebook's users want to remain there.
Fascinating stuff. Great reporting across this story. Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer, thank you very much indeed. And of course, just to bring you those breaking headlines once again, we have heard that Facebook is being sued by investors over voter profile harvesting. Investors claim Facebook failed to disclose the vulnerability. Remember, it is known that they potentially saw that the data had been taken back in 2015. And meanwhile, pro-Trump research firm has gathered data without permission. Now, coming up, we turn to Cambridge Analytica's methods. Was the company truly able to figure out Facebook's users' psyches? We ask a Facebook insider next. This is Bloomberg. Now, Salesforce has agreed to buy MuleSoft for nearly $6.5 billion. Shares of MuleSoft surged as much as 28% on Tuesday following a report that the sale was imminent. MuleSoft helps clients create applications by connecting data from customers' servers to the cloud. Salesforce is paying $36 in cash. That is 0.711 shares of its common stock for each MuleSoft share. Now, we continue our coverage of the fallout over the possible misuse of Facebook user data. The reports over just what data Cambridge Analytica had and, well, how it was used continue to pour in. Our next guest is someone with an insider's perspective on how Facebook operates. And he just published a story for Wired that calls into question the effectiveness of the use of something called psychographic targeting. Antonio Garcia Martinez was a former product manager at Facebook and is now a contributing writer at Wired. Wonderful to have you on the show. And it's interesting, we've had some bragging coming from the now suspended CEO of Cambridge Analytica, saying that we did all the research, we did all the data, all the analytics, all the targeting. Where does this leave Facebook data, do you think?
Yeah, well, like I say in my piece, there's a saying in the ad tech world, just because it doesn't work doesn't mean you can't sell it. That sounds like a great sales line from the CEO of Cambridge. I don't know if I quite buy it. The reality is psychographics has been used for a while. It's actually a decades-old sort of practice. In this case, it's a little bit more quantitative in that they built a quantitative model. But remember, what they did was they built a Facebook app. They built a model based on responses to that app. But at the end of the day, you still have to find that user on Facebook. So you still actually have to use Facebook's targeting data. Otherwise, it's very difficult to actually find that user on Facebook. So I think the real challenge for them would have been taking their model and actually translating it into Facebook data. That's, I think, part of the story that's going a little underreported. So I don't think that Facebook's data was at all dinged by the existence of Cambridge Analytica, in my opinion.
And then let's dig into the other main part of your story, being that we're all getting very het up here, particularly across the media. We're shining a light on this. People are worried about the safety of their personal data. But actually, perhaps the irony is you think even if they use the personal data, this sort of use isn't very effective. It wouldn't have helped Trump win the 2016 election, you don't think?
Yeah, no, I really don't think so. I think one of the big stories about the election, at least from my point of view, is that a lot of the techniques and strategies that the sort of regular commercial world has been using for years are only now being experimented with by the political campaigns. And so, I think there are a number of techniques, and I wrote another piece for Wired about how I think Trump actually did win the election. And that was using a tool called custom audiences, where they joined to voter rolls and first-party data that the RNC had. And that really is valuable. That's kind of like the retargeting that you see on Facebook after browsing on a web page or whatever, and you see that same set of shoes. Well, Trump also did that. But the reality is what Cambridge did, in many ways, is very old. This isn't a new story. I remember when I was a product manager at Facebook, I actually met with a team from Cambridge who was working with what was then one of Facebook's largest advertising partners, TBG Digital, and they were also building psychometric models and trying to use it. At the time, it didn't work terribly well, but they didn't have a lot of options. Facebook only shipped a lot of these great targeting things in 2012. And so, I think in some ways, they're kind of stuck in the past by using the models they were using, in my opinion.
That's fascinating. So you, while at Facebook, were meeting with Cambridge Analytica. I want to get your perspective, having worked at Facebook. I went to your Twitter feed, and you said, actually, potentially now there is turmoil within Facebook. Before, they held hearts and minds. But talk to us what you put on Facebook, that potentially now there is big sign of turmoil.
So just to clarify your earlier statement, I didn't work with Cambridge Analytica, but I did meet with Cambridge psychologists who were working with the partner at the time, to be clear. But to answer, a lot of Cambridge going on in that story. But just to answer your question, to me, one of the unique things about Facebook was, even relatively late in its history, and even though I seem early now, I joined when the company was already 2,000 employees. There was this real feeling of being mission-oriented, right, and being very motivated for the overarching mission of Facebook. Everyone really was a believer, and thus it was really a hard nut to crack. Many journalists couldn't get employees to leak. The fact that now lots of different outlets, Wired that I write for and others, are actually finding lots and lots of sources, kind of sitting there and kibitzing about the internal intrigue of Facebook, that's really unusual. And in my opinion, I have to say it's kind of a bad sign for what's going on internally.
To voice what Facebook has put out, they said privacy and data protections are fundamental to every decision we make. The policing of data is going to get a lot tougher at Facebook, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think that's true. Certainly the part of Facebook that I worked on, which was the ad system, not the platform system that leaked the data here, was super paranoid about data and was really aggressive about advertisers in terms of not leaking data. That may not have been the attitude reigning on the platform side. The weird thing to me, to be honest, is that there actually aren't that many users of Facebook platform anymore. When's the last time you used a Facebook app, right? Probably not very recently. And this was a big initiative the company had in 2011. It didn't really take off, and they've kind of left it sitting there. And so, yeah, I think one of the constructive things the company could do is to be a lot more aggressive about how it deals with partners on the Facebook platform side, so that this sort of thing can happen again.
Fascinating to get your perspective. Antonio Garcia Martinez, former Facebook product manager and contributing writer at Wired. We thank you for joining us. Now, coming up, we continue to monitor Uber's fatal autonomous crash in Tempe, Arizona. How big of an impact this might have on the future of autonomous driving. That's next. And this is Bloomberg. Now, a story we continue to watch: the tragic death of a woman hit by an Uber self-driving car in Tempe, Arizona. Police say a video from the autonomous vehicle shows the woman moving in front of it suddenly. It's a factor that investigators are likely to focus on as they assess the performance of the technology in the first pedestrian fatality involving an autonomous vehicle. Now, the police chief on the case told the San Francisco Chronicle that after seeing the video, quote, "It's very clear it would have been difficult to avoid this collision in any kind of mode." Still, Uber has halted all autonomous vehicle tests. Joining us now is Bloomberg Technology's Mark Bergen, who has been covering this story for us. So it looks as though it would have been very difficult whether it was autonomous or not. But what is the reaction from Uber since yesterday?
They've been pretty quiet. You know, they say they're still working with authorities in Tempe. I think what the autonomous vehicle community and a lot of companies at large are still waiting to see if there was a perception issue, if there was an issue with the car, if there was an issue with the Volvo that Uber is using, or if it, like the police have suggested, that if something is just purely unavoidable, if it was human or software in control.
Nothing real update from Uber, but as you say, other companies listening out, the likes of Apple, Waymo, GM, all building their own autonomous vehicles or testing that sort of technology. Are we yet to hear or see any reaction from these sorts of companies?
We've seen some reaction. Toyota has suspended their autonomous testing. They put out a statement this morning saying that they're concerned about the emotional state of their safety drivers. GM Cruise has said that they're continuing to plan. There's no stops. They're planning to launch a service next year. We've not heard from Waymo, which is considered the technical leader in the field. We've yet to hear from Apple. There is one city, Boston, has actually put an ultimatum, is temporarily pausing all tests there. They have a startup called Nutonomy that's testing the city. We did hear that Pittsburgh, where Uber is testing and other companies, has said that it's business that these companies can continue to test on the road, so they're not changing any plans.
There's an interesting piece out today really showing that perhaps Apple is getting into autonomous vehicles far more than we perhaps had perceived, particularly in California. Can you update us on that?
Yeah, as far as we know, it sounds like Apple has more cars on the road than Waymo. Part of that may be that Waymo's been doing this for a very long time, and they've been testing California roads for almost 9 years now. And what Waymo is, you know, California has been a little less receptive and open. They have laws now in the books that there has to be a human in the vehicle. And there's states like Arizona and Texas and Washington that are a little more deregulated. And so you have companies like Uber and Waymo just testing a lot more miles now in Arizona than they would be in California.
Bloomberg Technology's Mark Bergen, great reporting across this. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, coming up, back to the fallout of the Facebook data story. We turn to the political response. Will executives have to face lawmakers on both sides of the Atlantic? That's next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde. And it's the latest development in the Facebook saga. Facebook is being sued in California in court by its shareholders who say they suffered losses after it was disclosed that Cambridge Analytica improperly obtained profile information on 50 million users. Now, Facebook's failure to safeguard the privacy of users is being blamed in an investor lawsuit for a slump in its share price that followed the revelation users' data were harvested without permission by a research firm connected to the US President Donald Trump. So, talking, of course, of governments, we're going to be seeing what the reaction is on both sides of the Atlantic with Sarah Forden, who leads Bloomberg's team covering what tech companies are facing in Washington, and Bloomberg's Kartikeya Mehrotra also covering the legal side of the story. Now, first of all, Sarah, let's go to you and talk about the government reaction here, because I sit here in London. I've been speaking to MPs. They want to speak with Mark Zuckerberg. It seems that US government leaders want to speak with the executives of the company, as they do in Europe as well.
Well, certainly Facebook is now under unprecedented fire in Washington. We have lawmakers on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers of Congress asking for briefings. The company is going in today and tomorrow to talk with different members of Congress, and there are calls by some for Mark Zuckerberg himself to come to Washington, although we don't have anything scheduled yet, and a full committee has not actually scheduled a hearing or asked him to come and testify. We also have a federal agency that is the chief privacy watchdog for the U.S. Looking into whether Facebook violated its privacy practices here in the Cambridge Analytica scenario.
And talk to us about whether they violated, in particular, the 2011 consent decree. This could mean fines, couldn't it, Sarah?
Yes, and that is the question. Just to remind everybody, we do not have a federal privacy law, so the way Facebook is looked at by the government is because the FTC will enforce what a company says, what it promises its users will do about privacy and protecting their data. So in 2011, they slipped up, they acknowledged that they slipped up, and they now have to ensure that they have gotten informed, explicit consent from their users before sharing any data with third parties.
Fascinating. So there's the government angles. I'm going to look at the investor base angles right now with Kadake. Talk to us about this lawsuit. Do we know who the investor base is?
So it's all investors who own shares after February 3rd, 2017. That's when they released their 2016 annual report, at which time they addressed the threat of any misuse of data by third-party users, but they did not get into any details regarding such a breach. And at that point in time, investors believe they should have at least known what was going on with their data to inform investors, to inform shareholders. And once again, similar language was used in their next quarterly report in May, where they did not disclose any potential losses. Investors, at least these attorneys, believe that they should have known what was going on with their data at that time.
And this is in a California court. Kadake, give us an idea of how quickly these sorts of lawsuits will occur, how we might see a response from the company. What do we expect to go from after these sorts of announcements from an investor base?
That's right. The suit was filed in the Northern District of California here in San Francisco. The lawsuit was filed today. There will be a notice period for Facebook to reply, likely a month. The lawsuit itself will take months, if not longer. It's very hard to tell exactly how long this litigation takes, especially as complex as what we're dealing with here with data privacy.
Well, certainly when you've been seeing such a significant fall in the share price and some, $45 billion wiped off, maybe many will be asking for their just reserves. We'll see Bloomberg's Sarah Forden and Kadake Mehrotra. Great to have your opinions both on the government and the legal angles here. Now, last year, Mark Zuckerberg made headlines with his tour of the American heartland. Well, now, the Facebook CEO may have to get ready to embark on a tour of Europe and its governments. Lawmakers in the UK and the European Union have requested that Zuckerberg appear before them to answer questions on the alleged misuse of user data by Cambridge Analytica. We spoke with UK Member of Parliament, Damien Collins, about whether Zuckerberg has responded to his invite.
I think he should agree. It's down to him whether he chooses to or not. But I think it's been really noticeable that we've heard nothing from him so far since this story broke a few days ago about the data breach and the involvement of Cambridge Analytica. And I also think as well there are important outstanding questions that we have as a committee following the evidence session we had with Facebook in Washington last month. We asked them then expressly about their relationship with Cambridge Analytica. We asked them about the way in which developers can harvest user data from Facebook and about the enforcement powers Facebook have to get back control of that data. I don't think we received satisfactory answers to any of those questions. So I think it requires someone at the top of the company whose job it is to know every detail and who can go through this properly.
This misuse of data of 50 million or so users of Facebook in the US is surrounding the 2016 presidential election. You, of course, are investigating potentially the role of social media within the UK's vote to leave the EU. Do you think that Russian manipulation was done then? Do you think that Facebook has anything to answer regarding the Brexit vote?
Well, we know that there was Russian involvement during the Brexit campaign period, but at the moment, from what's been published, that appears to be at a lower level than was the case in the American presidential election. But it's still something we're looking to map out, and it is incredibly important. The UK Information Commissioner also has her own investigation looking at the way data was used during the referendum period. I certainly think data analytics were used in that time, to some extent by Russian agencies, but also by the official Leave campaign as well. I think we need to understand more, and users need to understand more about the way in which data can be used to target them with information, both from organisations they know and sometimes from Russian agencies and bodies they don't know. And there's very little transparency often around where those messages are coming from.
We've heard your voice, of course, calling for Mark Zuckerberg. We're also hearing from regulators in the United States, the FTC. There are reports that they are looking into whether Facebook has potentially broken the consent decree. Do you think regulators will get involved in the United Kingdom as well?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting issue, because in European law there are restrictions on holding data based on people's political views and opinions. But what that legislation didn't necessarily consider was the fact that people may harvest huge amounts of consumer data, data that people consented to give as part of, surveys on their opinions or on their consumer habits, but they never consented for that data to be used in a political campaign, and particularly to be held and used by a company that's not a registered political party. So I think this is a big area of concern, and something that the UK Information Commissioner is looking at. Do you think that any changes will be put in place internally by Facebook? What changes would you want to see to ensure that your minds are put at rest that this won't occur again? Well, I suppose our concerns are the way in which they handle and manage data, to understand how easy it is for developers and others to acquire data off of the Facebook site by their engagement with Facebook users, and then how Facebook police what happens to that data. Because for many people who are Facebook users every day of the week, they will be looking at this story and asking themselves the questions, well, how come Facebook got that much data about me? And what do they do with it? And is that data safe? And that's what Facebook have to provide reassurance of people on, is that they are a safe custodian of that data. And I think a lot of the outstanding questions we have for Facebook are around that. There's also the other question about promoted messaging through Facebook, paid for messaging through Facebook itself, and whether Facebook is good at policing that messaging and understanding who the advertiser is, and if it's a political campaign, that advertiser isn't breaking any electoral laws by seeking to advertise from a foreign country into a country like the UK or the USA. I think these are important areas of understanding business practice and ethics that we need to get to the bottom of.
Do you believe social media companies, not just Facebook, but Twitter and Google's YouTube, have become too powerful?
They have a huge amount of power. And I think if they think that they are too powerful and therefore slightly above the reach of governments and parliaments, then I think as organisations that believe those things often do, they will find that it is different, that ultimately it doesn't matter how big you are, you have to comply with the law in the territories where you operate, and if you don't, there are sanctions that can be used against you. But what we should look to Facebook is to be responsible and to act in a responsible way, and at the moment I think it's incumbent on them to demonstrate that they are, and for the people that own and run that company to be more forthcoming and provide clearer answers to the questions we're putting. And have they responded to you as yet? Well, as I said, we have outstanding questions from the evidence session, the hearing we had with Facebook last month. They still haven't responded to those outstanding questions, even though the hearing was over a month ago. And obviously we've said today that we want Mark Zuckerberg or someone of similar or equal rank in the company to give evidence to us. So I think they do need to respond, and I think they do need to explain around the Cambridge Analytica data breach, what occurred, why was it that they knew about this 2 years ago but didn't act then to ensure that the data had been recovered.
That was British Member of Parliament Damian Collins there. Now, in the halls of Capitol Hill, criticism of Facebook also reached a fever pitch. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana is part of a bipartisan effort to publicly question tech CEOs before a hearing. He caught up with Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli and discussed why he wants to get Facebook to Washington.
It's no longer a company, it's a country. I mean, it's very powerful. They touch millions and millions, billions of people. Data is the new oil. we need to ask some hard questions because some of Facebook's behavior lately has kind of gotten into the foothills of creepy.
Now, an update on Salesforce's deal to buy MuleSoft for you, about $6.5 billion deal that is. The company has now also raised its full year 2022 sales goal to between $21 and $23 billion because of the MuleSoft purchase. We'll stay on the headlines around Salesforce for you. This is Bloomberg. Now, some breaking news for you regarding Uber. It's actually from the National Transportation Safety Bureau coming across the Bloomberg now, saying that the Uber investigation will address operating conditions of the car. Now, remember, this all surrounds the tragic events of an Uber autonomous vehicle striking a woman and killing her in the last few days. Uber investigation will address driver interaction, so says the National Transportation Safety Bureau. And notably, they say they've had investigators in Tempe on Tuesday collecting information. We'll have more on that story for you later. But meanwhile, London-based venture capital firm 8 Roads Ventures has announced a $375 million fund to help young companies in Europe and Israel grow. And the intention of this fund is to make an average investment of as much as $30 million in areas such as enterprise software, fintech and digital health. 8 Roads Ventures is a proprietary investment arm of Fidelity International. And joining us now with more is Devor Hebel. He is 8 Roads Ventures managing partner, been with the company, 13 years. Congratulations on the new fund. You've got bigger checks to write. You've got more money to put to work. What's the sweet spot?
Well, look, we're very excited, and we think that the bigger fund is really a reflection of the opportunity that is available for European companies. And there is no Silicon Valley in Europe. Great companies could come from everywhere. So we had great investments in Hamburg, Germany, Tel Aviv, Prague, Malmö, Sweden. So we just want to keep doing that. You know, we want to find companies that are just ready to scale up, and we want to back them to help them become globally successful.
Talking of companies that become globally successful, one that's very successful here in the UK is Made.com. It's a company that you invested in, and in fact, you've just put more money to work there in their latest round. It's got an institutional investor in that particular round, an unnamed one, we understand. It's interesting. I want to talk about the new investors coming into Europe, because just today we have N26, a fintech company in Germany, getting backing from Asia giant Tencent. You've got Vision Fund, SoftBank's Vision Fund, putting phenomenal amounts of money into Series Bs of the likes of Improbable here in the UK. Is there a lack of capital in Europe, or is actually everyone getting in on the party?
We still think that there is a funding gap in Europe versus some of the other markets like US. And this is where I think you see some of the new players coming into the market, because they see that increasingly Europe is building global champions. You know, Spotify, Supercell, some of the globally leading companies, homegrown here in Europe. So we are seeing a lot more international capital interested in investing in these companies. But I think what we also see is a lot more new entrepreneurial ventures being started, many more than we've seen, say, a decade ago.
What about the likes of Spotify coming to the market, listing in the US? We'll pretend that, you know, not happening, but they are listing. Does that really benefit the ecosystem? Are you expecting more listings? We've got Funding Circle, for example, talking of an IPO. What about your own portfolio?
We definitely think that IPOs are a good route. Oftentimes just fundraising routes, because oftentimes, you know, people don't sell into the IPO, but they're just fundraising for continuing to grow the companies. But ultimately, you know, healthy IPO market is good for all of the investors involved with the company. So we are definitely quite excited to see, you know, Spotify potentially listing and some of the other ones. I think it's a good trend that is benefiting the ecosystem significantly.
What about regulation here in Europe? You come here on a day where we're talking about Mark Zuckerberg being called up in front of the UK MPs. Well, they're asking to see him anyway. Europe regulators want to see. How do you see the regulatory environment in Europe helping or hindering the growth of startups born and bred here?
But most of our companies are still, fortunately or unfortunately, too small to really be on the radar of the regulators. But I think we are having, you know, quite a unique time in our history, where, you know, you have some of the companies, you know, like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, reaching sizes, I think today close to $3 trillion in market capitalization, something like a 15x growth in a little bit over 10 years. So I think technology is squarely on the map now. And, for a long time, I think we have benefited from, free access to search, free access to social networking, cheaper access to wireless networks, and so on and so forth. But ultimately now we realize that we need to also address the questions around, so what does this do for consumers? What does this do for businesses and even small startups? I mean, they work with a lot of the folks in the technology ecosystem. So I think we do need to ask some tough questions as to so how do we proceed? And I think you were talking about Uber and some of the questions that for example AI brings to the table. How will the artificial intelligence change how we view liability? So there's lots of questions I think we need to start addressing now, and I think this is what we are seeing.
What about you as a VC and the questions you ask of your portfolio companies? We're here talking about diversity in technology needing to be raised, more women, more those of ethnic diversity. What about, as companies grow, such as Uber, keeping ethics in line with the LPs? How do you address that with the entrepreneurs that you want to back?
I think we're quite, I think ethics are always very important to us. I mean, I think we, as private investors, take great care in diligence to try and kind of evaluate and mitigate all of the kind of potential risks. And we actually have some companies that are working in terms of helping regulating or sort of managing sort of fraud and other things that go on in the market. So for example, AppsFlyer, which is one of our companies in Israel, highly successful, they try and manage fraud that goes on in the mobile advertising ecosystem. So I think we actually can be helpful in trying to somehow solve the problem that we're seeing today in the market through the entrepreneurial ventures and adventures.
Tech for good. We'll see more of it from you, we see. Hope. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Great, and congratulations on the new fund. Of course, that's Davor Hebel, 8 Roads Ventures managing partner on the new fundraise. Now coming up, as we wrap up our coverage of Facebook, we'll show you the chart you need to see before you leave. This is Bloomberg. Now, while the financial community watches an internal crisis unfold at Facebook, with a lot of market valuation lost in the process, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos tweeted this: a picture of himself strutting in the sunshine with a robotic dog. Now, Mark Zuckerberg may see himself sinking one spot on the world's rich list, but Bezos continues to sit pretty in that #1 spot, especially as Amazon vaults ahead of internet rival Alphabet in market value for the first time. Now, as we wrap things up, I want to show you one last chart on the Bloomberg terminal. Type it in if you got one. Chart G #BTV3765. We're turning our attention once again to the trials and tribulations that is Facebook, and the market capitalization falling some $45 billion over 2 days. Look at that white line. Share price really tumbling now below the blue line, which is the 50-day moving average. That is a tech indicator for this tech stock that is not looking pretty. As we've said before, though, the contagion's starting to ease. We are seeing the likes of Amazon, Alphabet managing to rise, Netflix on the up today despite the falls in Facebook stock. But how long will this story continue to unfold? That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder that we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. San Francisco, 9 p.m. in London.